Right, good morning, everyone. Welcome. We've had a few people drop out sending me emails saying they've had some last-minute job demands, which is quite ironic. But of course, we know that's how life goes, don't we? We just know that that's the way our modern workplaces are built. Or is it? So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be having a look at defining those problems in a little bit with a bit more clarity. So just a quick introduction to me. I think I probably know most of you before, but I facilitate these webinars on a sort of monthly basis, and they're really generally inquiries into topics. So it's informal. At any point in time, you can pop something in the chat box if you disagree, if you'd like to ask a question, if you're not sure, just pop something in the chat box, and we will attempt to get to as many questions as possible. Now, this is slightly different to the way we normally run these. Normally, we run these with an expert that's talking to you, and then you butt in. But on this occasion, you're going to be very, very much part of it, because we are going to put you into breakout rooms so that we can help to define some of these problems with a bit more clarity. And so interaction will be via the chat box. Please do interact. There are two, hopefully we'll get to 2 breakout rooms. We are recording this, but the breakout rooms won't be recorded. So afterwards, I'm going to ask our facilitators to report on the conversation that took place and the process that took place in the breakout rooms. We're hoping that today you're going to go away, as much as anything, with some new thinking and with a process which you can apply in your organizations. So, right, I have enrolled these lovely gentlemen here today. So I met Tim, and Tim is perfect to be talking about this today because this is his absolute background. So Tim, we're going to introduce them each in a moment, but I also then thought, oh my goodness me, we're going to have quite a lot of breakout rooms here. Who can I get involved who's really, really good, and also has recently gone freelance? So we've got John, and we have also got Jerry, and I'm just going to introduce you to those in a moment. So this is why Tim is perfect for this conversation. He has basically an approach to organizations which looks very systemically at what causes work problems, as opposed to, so I do a bit of that, but I also do the training element with managers, for example, and general mental health awareness and how to avoid burnout. So if we look at the different impacts on somebody's mental health at work, we've obviously got them as an individual, we've got their relationship with their manager, and then we've got the systemic issues. And today, systemic is what we're going to be looking at. So he established Make Work Work Better in 2020 to design wellbeing into your work. And Tim is available if anybody would like to hire him. He's available to come into your organization and support you with this kind of methodology that we're going to be looking at today. John, I met John when he was at Givaudan, and he has a career in global health and safety. He's actually located in Switzerland, and he's specialist in culture and culture change, strategy development and implementation, leadership development, HOP, behavioral safety, and health and well-being. And what Givaudan did really well, they were one of the very early organizations we worked with who actually made sure that their senior leadership was very, very much part of building their well-being strategy. It wasn't given to a junior member of team, it was given to the exec, and as a result that helped to design stuff in, as opposed to it just being sort of nice stuff on the top. And Jerry, so Jerry is a risk and safety management consultant, he's a coach, and again I heard him speak, or actually recently at a Beyond HSCQ event that Shirley Parsons ran, and I was sitting there going, yes, oh my goodness, yes, 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 I love what he was saying. And so I invited Tim to be part of this today because this is also very much a sweet spot for Jerry. All of these people are available to work with you in your organizations, as am I, of course. Right, now let's have a quick look at where we've come from and where we've gone to. I'm just going to do a very brief intro, and then I'm going to hand over to Tim. I am assuming that you're all on the same page with me here, because that's why you're here. When we started with the whole approach to well-being, very early days, it was very much an HR benefits thing. It was yoga, Pilates, fruit on a Friday, that sort of thing. And then when I started this business in 2017, everyone went mad for mental health first aid. And that started the conversation, but it wasn't looking systemically at what caused problems in the workplace relating to stress. Then we started to look at manager training, which actually is looking systemically a little bit more, because managers are part of your culture. They very much have a huge impact on your well-being at work. So I was feeling slightly more hopeful we were moving in the right direction. COVID came along, and very much it was about COVID specific interventions just to make people feel better about a very difficult situation. Finally, we're now doing senior management team training. When we did a survey in 2021, only 23% of people had included their senior management team in their training. And I now regularly run senior management team briefings and actually get them involved in understanding of stress risk assessment and understanding how their behavior has a huge impact on the organization and the stress within the organization. And we are now, with the advent of 45,003, starting to look at much more sustained cultural approach, which looks systemically. So that's why we are all here today, because we understand that aspect of it. What were we trying to achieve? And I think this is very pertinent to what we're going to do today. We're going to come up with some problem statements. And I don't think we did that when we were looking initially at what we did in this field. Everyone jumped on the mental health first aid bandwagon, and absolutely it has had some success, because if we were aiming to destigmatize conversations about mental health issues, we've come somewhere. If we were aiming to raise awareness about mental ill health, to raise awareness of how we need to get better at managing ourselves and the sorts of things we can do, yes, we're having some success. However, if the problem we were trying to solve with our interventions was reducing sickness absence, staff retention, staff engagement, I think we can safely say we are not successful in that area. We are absolutely failing right now. And that is shown from things like the HSE statistics. It's shown from the fact that the long-term sickness has increased dramatically in the last few years. We have a disability issue. The number of people claiming disability benefits doubled in a year. And the former chief economist of the Bank of England says Britain is sick, effectively. So we really have to, as health and safety professionals, as HR professionals, really look at what we're doing, which is not helping people to be well at work. Because although it's become less physically dangerous, it appears to become more psychologically dangerous. When we look at stress issues at work, this is what comes out. Every single stress risk assessment that I do with an organization, or psychosocial risk assessment, the intensification of work, job demands is the big one. It might be expressed as poor work-life balance. It might be expressed as too much work. It might be expressed as burnout, but that's effectively what people are saying. Then we have line managers who are inconsistent when it comes to people skills. Many of them were recruited or promoted for their technical skill set, not for their ability to empathize and manage people. And that is a consistent problem across the board. Less in organizations, number 3, that I work with, but I do know that nationally there is an issue with a drop in the level of control people have over how they work, particularly among lower paid workers. It's very much systematized. You have a certain amount of time you're allowed to break, you have to go to the loo at a certain time, that sort of thing. And the combination of high demands and low control is known as job strain. And we know that that's bad for us. It's bad for our physical and our mental health. And then in the UK, we've actually started to weaken some of those protective shields. If you think about what happened with P&O ferries about 18 months ago, that's an example of a lower protective shield than we used to have in the UK. Because obviously our businesses are part of an overall societal culture, aren't they? It's not just existing in a vacuum. We know, don't we, from the health and safety profession, that the best way to look at a hazard is to physically remove it. And most of what we've done in the wellbeing arena so far has not been looking at that. It has been looking at PPE, protecting the worker by allowing them to self-manage better, or providing them with greater resilience, or encouraging them to do yoga. And actually what we should be doing is looking at eliminating. And we cannot do that without involving our senior teams and people that are integral to the way the business functions. That's how we create a systemic approach. So the HSE has come up with this as a means of developing your wellbeing strategy, which is first look at the causes of stress in the workplace, design those out or mitigate for them. Then we've got the secondary, which is educating colleagues, health promotion, that sort of thing. And then we've got the supporting people back to health, which might be when they're off sick. It might be when they are just unwell in the job. So that would be where your mental health first aid would fit. It would fit in tertiary interventions. So we've probably done some secondary. Very few of us have done the primary aspects yet. We've got a couple of choices when we look at a stress risk assessment. We can go with the HSE, and it is actually a legal requirement in the UK and in about 50 countries around the world to do an organisational stress risk assessment. In some countries around the world, they are now starting to really enforce this. UK, less so. However, it does just make sense to do one. It's looking at where the stress comes from in that organisation to start with. And then now we've got ISO 45003, which takes a much broader approach. And I've just highlighted in yellow there the ones which I think are related to this idea of job demands, which is a very catch-all category from HSE, isn't it? Roles and expectations, job design, workload and work pace, working hours and schedule, and work-life balance. Okay, that has been a quick romp through because I don't want to steal time from the bit which people are here for, which is the bit to problem solve with Tim, but it's just setting the context. When we look at mitigation, we have this word job demands. That, to be honest, is only a tiny part of the puzzle to find that word and think that's our biggest stress risk. Because what does that come down to? Because unless we can actually express the problem more clearly, we cannot mitigate, we cannot design it out. Because it could be any number of things. It could be pressure points with a supply chain or clients. It could be delegation and prioritization skills. It could be role modeling. It could be some people put in meeting times mitigation. Whether that's actually related to the problem, I don't know. But we really need to define our problem much more clearly before we just jump to the idea that it's job demands. So just to manage your expectations, this is the wheel that we use when it comes to well-being. So well-being for us is a concept which is not fixed. It is something which is very dependent upon a number of factors. And we've divided those into three main ones. Me as an individual. So when it comes to me, how good am I at prioritization, at delegation, at understanding, what the really important stuff is? Or am I like a hamster on a wheel every day? My manager, how good is my manager at delegating? How well do they help me prioritize? So those are two aspects, and those are two things we are not going to be talking about today. They are absolutely relevant, but this is not the subject for today. The subject for today is the third aspect of that wheel, the organization. So how does the organization systemically actually produce more job demands on us? So what can we do as organizations to design some of that stuff out? So that's where the breakout rooms are focusing. And oh gosh, we've got a really weird one there. It's come out in some big text. Sorry, we were amending this at the last minute because two of the problem statements that we picked from the preparation we asked you to do, two of those individuals are not coming. So we've actually now got three problem statements. These are the three that we are going to be looking at, which are staff cuts, staff who leave or retire are not replaced, leading to massively increased workloads for colleagues. We're looking at tasks or projects dropped onto me at short notice with short deadlines. And we're looking at meetings online most of the time, which means back to back all day. What's the time to do the real work? Increased belief you have to be available all the time. Now you'll see I've put a name beside each of those. Those are the people that actually nominated that problem, and actually I'm going to attempt to put them in the correct breakout room so they can describe it more. But we are looking for another problem statement, and I didn't have time to review all the emails that came through to find another one. So if you would like to pop your problem statement into the chat box, we will select one from those to add to them whilst Tim is speaking. So right, that was a very quick, I'm sorry, I don't normally talk quite that fast. I just don't want to take away from the time we've got. Right, sorry, let me just go back. So over to you, Tim. I'm going to mute myself.
And I'll check I'm not on mute. Yes. Hello, everybody. I'm Tim. I'm from Make Work Work Better, and which is really just me. And as Heather very kindly said earlier, my interest is how the way that businesses work and our processes and teams work together influence the way that they feel and their well-being. And we're here today to talk about workload, and specifically we're going to talk about like two. I mean, like, because workload's workload. Like we have workload, otherwise we don't have work. So workload in itself is not a, is not a bad thing. But there are a few things around workload that can influence the way we feel about it and influence how healthy the workload is for us in our situation. So there's two elements to this that we're going to be talking about today. If you wouldn't mind building the slide when we have that. The first one of those is excess demand. So how does so our workload gets bigger and less manageable if we have excess demand feeding into our workload. But then once we've got our workload, like the amount of work we have to do, the way that we do our work can really impact that. So if we have suboptimal processes, then a manageable amount of work is going to feel unmanageable. And so what we're going to talk about today, actually, we're going to talk about the other way around. So the first breakout room is going to be about our process and the way that we do things, and the first and the second one's going to be about the idea of excess demand. But the thing about process, and if you just move us on, please, Heather. The thing about process is that no process that ever happens in any situation, workplace, life, whatever, is born perfect. No process is born perfect. Processes are born from necessity, and they are done in the way that makes most sense the first time we do a job. And then the thing about processes, if you wouldn't mind, Heather, is that no process is born perfect, and they only get worse. Unless you actually take time to scrutinize and improve that process and work out why you're doing things and is that the best way of doing it, all that will happen is you will do things the same way for a very long time, and then you'll add a bit to it. And then something will go wrong, so you'll add a bit to it. And then something will happen, so you'll add a bit to it. And eventually it'll become this mind-numbingly complicated thing that's probably mainly only in your head, or maybe you wrote it down once, but it doesn't really look like that anymore. And you never question it. It's just the way we do things here. It's always been done that way. And so I'm a big believer that process is that whenever we say that we have an excess amount of work, a lot of it stems from process. I'm going to give you an example from my world. I once worked with a team, and I've worked with quite a lot of teams who've had this as their initial problem statement, and it might sound really familiar, but talking to them, they're just, well, we just need more people, Tim. And I was like, okay, because the problem with we need more people is there's only one way of solving we need more people, which is to get more people. And in most cases, unless in many businesses, more people probably isn't an option, and it's certainly not a fast option. That's not going to have the impact that you want quickly, because you've got to get signed off and all this. So we need more people isn't really a problem so much as what you think the cause is. And so I said, well, okay, but so why do we need more people? And then if my head, the next thing was, well, we're really busy. We need more people because we're too busy. I said, well, everybody's busy. What does that mean? What does that look like? So what does the we're too busy in order to need more people, what does that look like? And so we spent some time digging into their work. We spent some time looking at what too busy meant. And what we ended up looking at was something like this, which was, for the last 11 months, the team had to work more than 40% overtime in the last week of the month in order to deliver on time. And this was much more helpful because this told us, well, where the problem actually exists, how big the problem is, when the problem occurs, and what the impact of the problem is. And we started looking at, well, what is happening in that last week of the month and in the time building up to it in order to mean that they have to work this overtime. What we discovered was there was a problem downstream with some of the data that was being delivered to this team that they had to process that was wrong. About a year ago, someone had changed something, and it has started coming through in a slightly wrong format. And rather than fixing that at source, a couple of members of a 5-person team were spending quite a lot of time fixing this incoming data. It's what we call failure demand. So it's demand that's generated by something that's not right, as opposed to value demand, which is demand that is generated by doing something that adds value. And so we fixed that problem downstream, and we freed up what was essentially an extra person's worth of time within the team. They didn't need more people. They needed to address their processes. From that example, what we're going to do now in breakout rooms is we're going to take some of your actual experiences, the things that you're experiencing at the moment, and we're going to go through a little bit of, because this is really hard. This is genuinely the hardest bit of problem solving, process improvement, is actually articulating what the problem is in a way that isn't, this is what I think the cause is, or this is what I think the solution is, or this is whose fault it is. Because those are the things that we default to as people when we're trying to describe something that's not right. We are incredibly uncomfortable sitting with, this is a thing that's wrong and I don't know how to fix it. Which my theory is that's evolutionary, because once upon a time, the problem that we haven't solved yet would eat us, but we're no longer in that situation. So that's what we're going to do in the breakout rooms. We're going to take the problem statement or the problems that people have come with, and we're going to work through it and try and get to something relating to a problem statement, or close to a problem statement, and some next actions to help you move a little bit closer to resolving it. Thanks, Heather.
Did you want me to move on? Yeah. There we go.
So a problem statement, just so we're really clear, it includes what's wrong, where and when it occurs, and how we measure it. That's really it. And they're usually really short, like good ones are really short. The longer you talk for, the longer you write for, the more likely you are to start doing some of the things that it doesn't include, which is guessing at the cause, guessing at the fix, allocating blame, general sweeping statements. The company always does this, or this team always does this, which often don't have any evidence around them, and also proposing solutions. So we want to avoid that. We want to concentrate really on what is the problem, and what is the impact of the problem.
Should we start with breakout room 1?
Yeah, I'll dive in and do my best. Yes, it was very fast, and we didn't arrive at a problem statement, but we did start to refine it. So Lauren already provided her a problem statement in one form, which, just to read it back as a reminder, was inefficiencies within the business. Everything takes longer than it should. And we got to one example to make it a little bit easier, which was when people make a document request in a certain part of the organization, they have to fill in a form online to get approval to access the document and change it. They then have to email the form to someone else and wait for an approval. So there's a lot of frustration around that process. It's a process about requesting access to documents. We've learned that, as far as we're aware, it's never approved. And also the scale, never not approved. So it's always approved. Sorry, okay. Wrong way around. And then the other thing we learned that it's apparently not measured, so we don't know the scale of the problem. And then we started to get a little bit into why is it necessary, or why is it that way? And I think that's then probably the second breakout room to look at root causes.
Tim, is there anything you want to say about that?
I'd say that if you remember, no process is born perfect and they always get worse. So yeah, see this a lot. A process is put in place, and it's never really scrutinized, and everybody hates it, but no one ever does anything about it, because that's the way it is. The important thing is that, if you've ever heard of Chesterton's fence, I forget the book, the G.K. Chesterton book, but he talks about don't take down a fence unless you know why the fence was put up in the first place. So a lot of the time, there's with these processes, we're kind of in the business of taking down fences, but that process will have been there for a reason. So the important thing is to make sure you understand what was the original intention of the process. Not the execution may be terrible, but what was it there for in the first place? What was it there to protect against? And what could we do differently in order to make sure that it is better for everybody than that? We still get whatever those were.
We had some great questions from the group as well on that basis. And I was saying there's always a logic to why something is there. It may no longer be good logic, but there is a logic somewhere hidden in there.
Thank you. Thanks. Room 2, was that you, Jerry?
That was me.
You, Tim.
Yeah, so Helena had her problem statement was around, or her problem was around work being landed short term. What was really interesting to me when Helena started talking about it was she used the word feel a lot. Feels like a lot of work. It feels like there's a lot of these things that land at the last minute. So what I would say is, and that's entirely natural, and the way that we feel is a massive part of this sense of overwhelm that these job demands land on. It's like you just feel like you can't go, because it feels like a lot. The benefit of this process that we're going through here is that turning feeling into fact. So it feels like a lot. How many are there? How many times does this happen? Where do they come from? What does it turn into? What's the outcome? What's the reality of it? And partly that's so that you can look at it and go, oh, maybe it's not as many as I thought, or maybe it is as many as you thought, but at least you know how many it is now. It also enables you to start a conversation with somebody in a little bit more a practical way, because if you say to someone, you're giving me too much work, then their response to that is going to be very different to, over the last 3 months, you've asked me to do 19 things with a deadline of less than 3 days. The impact that's had is I don't think I've done a great job of them all, because I haven't been able to work to my highest level of quality, which was something that Helena was concerned about. But also it means that I've not moved these 3 projects on at all. Okay, is that okay with the business? Because if it is, maybe your job's different to what you thought it was, but the business is making that decision, and it's not just a death by 1,000 cuts type thing. But it was a good discussion.
Jerry.
Very similar in reality. We kind of jumped into it, and then Diane provided a bit of background and a bit more explanation, but certainly it was very much digging. So that it was just to remind everyone, it was the staff cuts, so staff who leave or retire and not replaced, leading to massively increased workloads for colleagues. I think I lucked out because that's very similar to the one that Tim had as an example that he worked through anyway. So it's very much that we did have some really good conversations around what does the workload change look like? Is it just an increase in volume? Is it there was some good questioning around does they require people to upskill themselves, etc., which Diane just came in and clarified was just no, it's just there's less people and there's still an expectation from the business that the service demands and the service quality will not drop. So it very much is maintaining a volume and less people to deliver it. So we then got into that discussion around, well, how would you go about quantifying that and go and measure that so that you can, as Tim just quite aptly explained, it's something you can go 6 months ago we were doing this, to this is what we're doing now. So it is a measurable increase, which then can go back to the business and look at what that requirement is. And again, that then went into further questioning around we would want to look at what the processes are and how effective they are, notwithstanding the quote, as you said, of born imperfect and getting worse. Certainly the room itself was very good at there was no jumping to solutions, there was no blame, it very much was creating that questioning of like, we don't have enough knowledge around this, so these are the things we want to go back and get answers to help define the problem. But again, also 10 minutes, not a defined problem statement.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Jerry. Tim, I don't know if you want to have a think, by the way, because we've got about 14 minutes left. So by the time I finish, we're going to have like maybe 10, 12. So can you think about how we might be best to use that last 10 minutes to give people some more value so they go away with something which they can use? Thanks so much. So yeah, our really, really interesting. And ours was around the fact that there seemed to be a no time in the day, that you were basically expected to work long hours, that it was sort of back-to-back meetings. And actually what we immediately understood within that was that was a whole set of different problems. It wasn't all one problem. Having said that, what came out very early on was this idea of expectations. So there appeared to be an expectation from your manager and an expectation from you, who is passionate about your job, wants to make a difference, that you will be there until the problems are solved, until the work is done. But there was we couldn't get to grips with where that expectation came from, i.e., who said it, who has actually ever said that. And what Amy said, which I thought was brilliant, she said, we're suffering from institutional presenteeism. And what I said was, yeah, I completely get that. However, that isn't a useful problem statement, is it? It might be how we feel, but it's not a useful problem statement. So we dug into a couple of the issues, and we didn't get very far, but we dug into two. One was the fact that meetings are back to back all the time, and there is no ability to even go to the loo between a meeting, because you are basically running an hour. You're jumping from meeting to meeting. And then the other one was a lady that worked in a global organization and was expected to be available for her boss, who was in the US. So she is currently working 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. Not uniformly all the time, but at least feeling she has to be available to that person all the time whilst they're working too. So can't really go and walk the dog and do that sort of thing. That was as far as we got. I don't know if you've got any thoughts or comments on that, Tim.
I do actually. I've done a couple of really interesting pieces of work with teams and with global teams, like globally distributed teams, where I thought we were initially. I sort of had this expectation we were going to get into some really gnarly kind of like process improvement or problem solving. What we ended up doing was just spending a day defining the standards for the team. What is the expected overlap between time zones? Let's agree that we finish meetings 5 minutes early and 10 minutes later, so someone can go and get a glass of water. Let's do 50-minute meetings around the top of the hour. What is the agreement for people having a lunch break? What is the expectation around people being available for these things? And actually just thrashed them all out and put them into a kind of charter that the team could it's sort of two things. One is that they could hold themselves account to, but more it just made these unspoken expectations into something that the team had agreed. And some of them can be the team that I work in at the moment have an agreement that we will try as far as possible to not book a meeting between 12:30 and 1. Like we'll just try. Like if we can avoid it, we won't do it. And it just means that everybody gets a chance to go for a walk or eat some food without staring at a screen, But they're the things that those expectations, if we just accept that it's expected without either challenging it or saying, actually, this would work better for me, you're not going to be the only one who feels like it. All right. So some degree of documented and agreed standards, even if it's within a small team, can help immeasurably in that sort of situation. Yeah, absolutely.
I remember Jill talking about something very similar, actually. Jill Thornton, who's on the call. I know you've just written it. You've got ways of working charters. So yeah, because obviously
Fantastic.
You're Royal College of Nursing, so it must be like horrendous hours if you're not careful. So brilliant. Sorry, over to you, Tim. What do you want to do? Shall I share the screen again?
Yeah, I was going to say, if I go through the last piece and then maybe we just take the last 5 minutes for just for questions rather than going to the breakout room and just cover off anything people have got like that. Okay. I just wanted to pick up on Jill Thornton's just put a point around ways of working charters, but they don't work. People don't stick to it. When you bake the charter, there needs to be some kind of agreement of what happens if people don't stick to it. So if people don't put something into what you've agreed previously, can you just decline it? Then if you're going to do it, then you need to kind of recognize that there are guardrails around it. Yeah, if people don't, it's an administrative control ultimately. So you're expecting that people will change their behavior in order to fix it. But it is quite low down on that hierarchy of risk reduction. Right, next slide, please, Heather, because that's the one we just done. So we talked about excess demand, and we talked about the two things that fed into excess demand, which, so we talked about excess demand as being one of the other things that feed into workload. So we talked about suboptimal process, but excess demand, people asking for things a lot, people asking for more than is realistically deliverable. And I guess the point that I kind of want you to leave with thinking about or understanding here, is you just build the slide, please, Heather, is that one person's excess demand is another person's hitting targets. Okay, nobody is asking a team to do more work than is possibly deliverable just because they don't like them or they think it'll be funny. There's a business reason for it. And generally, the larger the organization, the more out of the larger the organization, the more out of sync departmental measurement gets. So there'll be one team who is targeted on delivering this many sales, and there'll be another team who has to deliver that, who has no sight of that whatsoever, and whose resourcing is not tied into it. So one of the things to bear in mind around excess demand is there will be a reason that it's happening. And there will be a measurement somewhere which is driving that to happen. And working out what that is and how that impacts you and work, because that will help. Those kind of conversations about excess demand have to happen at a higher up level. Okay, this because if it's genuinely not process driven, if it's genuinely that you've addressed, and I would always start with the process. I'd always start with the how can we do what we are doing more efficiently, because there is always waste that can be trimmed. Once you've but if genuinely the demand that is coming in is more than can be delivered by the operational teams or the teams who end up on the sharp end of it, what measure is driving that? Because those conversations need to happen at a higher level, and it needs to be, in order for us to hit this target, this is what needs to happen at another part of it. These two things don't necessarily fit together. I'll give you an example. I had a team where there was an operational team who were being who were always targeted on like how much productive work they did, how much chargeable work they did within their team, and then we had a workload allocator who was being targeted on how much work could he send to the offshore centre. So you've got a whole group of people who aren't filling their time with work because the work's being sent to an offshore centre, because the person who is responsible for sending them work is being targeted on something different. It's actually the opposite. They didn't have enough work, but you'll see where I'm coming from. So how do measurements, what is the measurement that is likely to be driving excess demand in your organisation? But the first thing I would always look at is process, because it's process that makes the difference. Right. What we got going on in the chat? That was the breakout exercise. I don't think we're going to have time to do.
Is it worth talking about that, though, in terms of breaking down how people might actually look at this?
Yeah, maybe. I would say if you can identify what business metric is driving the excess demand in your organization, what that then drives is who's the owner of that metric, and gives you a bit of a sense for what is the context. One of the things that we are always or often lacking when we have lots of workload is context. Why is this being asked for? And is it genuinely more important than the other thing that we're going to not do in order to do that? So by identifying what business metric might be driving the excess demand, my next step from that would always be, what's the conversation you could have to find out more about it, highlight it to the people that it is having an impact elsewhere in the business, or indeed start to improve the situation. Sometimes by finding out more, it gives you the information you need in order to be able to reprioritize effectively. Oh, something has changed strategically that I was not aware of, therefore we need to do things differently. The people who are sending that information over might have absolutely no idea of the impact it's causing. It by highlighting, it might help. Or the next stage is, right, we need to find a middle ground, we need to see how we improve that situation. But always assuming that everybody else is doing their best, and asking the conversation in order to find out why people are doing it.
I mean, we said that we weren't going to talk about managers and individuals, but it is fundamental, isn't it, that we kind of enter our workplaces with adult to adult communication, like, you know, as opposed to going, oh my goodness, I've been asked for that, I need to deliver it. It's asking the right questions, isn't it, to actually understand where it fits in the other stuff that you're doing and what you can drop. And are you still doing something you were asked to do 5 months ago that actually isn't required anymore because it's not being used anymore?
And I love Tim's point about assume everybody's also trying to do a good job, because then it prompts a different set of questions, rather than complaining about those other people in that other silo in the organization. You know, we're assuming they're doing a good job. Why would they do that? And then you can get it a bit more deep into the problem. And I think it also reflects on, you know, that discussion in group 1, you know, understanding why the process was put in, and is that reason still valid? Because you might be able to eliminate it completely, and if it is still valid, then can we do it more efficiently?
100%.
Anything else, Tim, for you that you want to cover, or has anybody got any questions they want to come off mute? You can pop your hand up and come off mute, because we've got a few minutes at the end. Can't see anybody that's put their hand up. Nope. Okay, if you want to do some closing remarks then, John, and please, yes, do email me with your feedback on this. I mean, it was new for us to work this way, but personally, I think it was useful. Obviously, we know for future we need to leave more time for a breakout room exercise, and one's probably enough. Henry, come off mute and let us know.
Yeah, thank you. It was just a question of, you know, that was so fantastic. Thank you, everyone. I really identify with that process of going through things there before trying to come up with a solution. So that's fantastic. And you were just mentioning then about the idea that we haven't even touched really on the relationship with the manager and the effectiveness of that communication, or the individual. So I suppose if you had 2 more hours today, you would have been talking about that as well. Does that, just from your perspective and advice, that should be part of this conversation as well, if you can?
So I'm going to say, or maybe Tim will say something different. I think this process is a process in its own right, which basically would take another 2 hours to get right. And then over and above that, there is training for managers and training for individuals. So training for managers to create an atmosphere of psychological safety so that people can actually have those conversations with them, and for individuals to understand their own drivers. So we had in our room a gentleman who said, I've just gone self-employed and now I'm a manager of my own time. Isn't that amazing? And I said to him, and you can still burn out, because I burnt out because of the demands I place on myself, because I'm a perfectionist and I'm a people pleaser. And those two things are going to go into any organization, whether you run it yourself or whether you run it, or whether you're part of an organization. So understanding our own drivers and understanding our managers understanding how to create a better atmosphere with us, those are two separate things which I think should be training every organization does. Tim, what do you think?
I 100% agree. I think what we talked about here, the process stands by itself. What I would say is the benefit of having a well-crafted problem statement is, think of it like feedback. You know, when we talk about giving feedback and you talk about the idea is when you give feedback and you talk about the thing that happened, it should be like a non-arguable, non-subjective thing, so that no one can go, no, that's not right. You know, that you talk about a thing that definitely happened. With a problem statement, if you craft it right, you're showing it to people. You can show it to anybody who's involved. You can paint it on the wall behind your desk and no one's going to take offense to it because it's simply a fact.
Yeah.
And that enables the conversations to be, and often the conversations with managers, because, you know, they're the people who are going to, if something's going to get kicked up to at some point. If you give them the facts, as opposed to somebody feels like this, then you cut away a lot of the stuff that actually a lot of managers aren't very good at. And you get
and I think Tim, if I
go, John.
Yeah, if I can dive in that, because I fully agree. Because I think if you don't have psychological safety and you challenge your manager, they are also going to get defensive.
Yeah,
they're not going to feel able to be vulnerable and say, yes, this doesn't work. If you have a good process and you talk about the thing that's happening in a factual way, then you take away the personal side and the emotion, and you can start to build an environment where you can have good adult to adult conversations. So yeah, perfect.
Absolutely.
We are 11 o'clock. Thank you so much. I think it was a really great start of a conversation, which we have to get so much better at. We know, and we can really make a difference in this area to stress in organisations if we actually take this approach, as you can all see. Thank you so much for attending, everyone. Please do drop me a line with some feedback. Thank you hugely to Tim, John and Jerry for giving up your time. Thanks everyone.
Bye-bye.